Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore Presents with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. This month, I'm pleased to introduce you to Katy Horan, an illustrator and interdisciplinary artist whose work has been exhibited throughout the United States and in Canada. She's been published in several books and 4 times selected for New American Paintings. She co-created Literary Witches, a celebration of magical women writers, and also the Literary Witches Oracle deck. She's also the illustrator of Ask Baba Yaga, Poetic Remedies for Troubled Times. Originally from Houston, Texas, Katy now lives and works in Austin. In this chat, we get into murder ballads, discussing what they are, how they work within folk music, how contemporary musicians have tried to reclaim the tradition, and the issues with examining ballads when all you might have is the lyrics. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to Fabulous Folklore. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. It was really interesting when I saw your book and I suddenly went, I've never featured music on the podcast. What am I doing?
Ah,
I was like, yes, I will have Katy on. I obviously,
good.
for the purposes of YouTube, obviously that's the book, Murder Ballads, um, Illustrated Lyrics and Law. It's a lovely
Mhm.
book. And you explain in the book what brought you to collecting murder ballads. But obviously, for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, could you recount what piqued your interest in these songs?
Yes. So in the introduction to the book, I tell the story of when I was about 25, 26. I was living in New York City at the time, specifically Brooklyn. And I was just trying to figure myself out as an illustrator and an artist. And I was just really into folklore and all types of folky things. And one evening, my boyfriend, now husband, and I went to go see a friend of his from his hometown in Ohio. He has a bluegrass band play on in this bar on the Lower East Side. And it's funny, I've tried to remember the name of it, but I'm not entirely sure. But they were playing just like your sort of like a average collection of like bluegrass country tunes. And I wasn't paying like a ton of attention until I heard the lyrics for this one song, which was, I found out later, a song that's known, most well known as The Dreadful Wind and Rain or Wind and Rain. Goes back to an old song called the Twa Sisters. But the part that I heard was about these two sisters who both love the same man. The one who he does not choose pushes the other one into the river where she drowns. The dead body floats down to a miller's pond where a fiddler comes along. And this is the part that like really got me. A fiddler came along and he made a fiddle of her hair and her bones. And when he played it, it would only sing of her murder. So it would like tell on the sister. And that just hit me in just like a really good way. It was just very kind of like this exact combination of macabre and melancholy and magic. And just the imagery of it was irresistible. So that was my very first introduction. And it took me a little while of like a sort of like several Googling sessions to really kind of find this song. And then I found the song and then read that it was part of this subgenre of folk music called murder ballads. And I was just like, oh, hold on, wait a second. I was like, that is an intersection of so many things that are interesting to me. And at the time, my interest in them was just as an artist. I just wanted to find all that imagery and source all that imagery and put it into my work. And the idea for the book was something that I originally had around 2011. And it wasn't even a book at first. The idea was this sort of fantastical, very unrealistic concept of a album, like a vinyl record, that would be like a compilation of people singing these songs, but the record jacket would have all these illustrations for the songs. I just needed an excuse to illustrate the songs. Um, and that idea just kind of like was clinking around in my brain for until 2022 after I actually then had an agent and had established myself as an illustrator and was able to actually make it happen.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love the fact that it was
Yeah.
kind of such an accidental coming across
Hmm.
of these things.
Hmm.
So, how, before we go any further, would you actually define a murder ballad for anyone who's not sure?
Well, so strictly, and when people discuss the genre, there's definitely some bending of the rules as far as the scholarship and discussion of it goes. But a ballad is a narrative song. It can also be extended into poetry and everything, but for the purposes of this book and my interest, it's a narrative song, and that tells the tale of a murder, true or fictitious. Like I said, people bend the rules, so sometimes there are songs about suicide that get in there. Sometimes there's just songs about sad, tragic deaths that are included as well in the genre, and there are a few of those in the book as well that aren't distinctly murder, but they share the same vibe. They share similar imagery, sort of similar DNA. But most of them, the vast majority of them, are about murders.
Cool. I'm saying cool like that's a good
Yeah.
thing. Obviously, it's not.
Yeah, no.
So you've got one in there that's slightly different, and that's the one about Queen Jane, which is likely to
Mm-hmm.
be Queen Jane Seymour, obviously Henry the
Yes.
VIII's third wife. Bad that you've got to work out which one she is. That one, how does that one fit in with Murder Ballads?
It is, like I said, it's one of the songs that is, although it's not a um, murder per se, although it's about her dying due to an emergency C-section, which historians I found out have been arguing about the actual historical accuracy of that. But for the sake of the ballad, it tells the story of a difficult birth that then leads to a C-section that leads to her death. So there is a killing, but it's not a murder in the classic sense. But that said, it came up many, many times in the scholarship that I was delving into as my research. And I just thought it was beautiful. And it's hard to find the rendition of it, but the actor Oscar Isaacs recorded a beautiful version of it for the Coen brothers film Inside Llewyn Davis, which is a film about a folk singer. And so I decided to include it just as a personal choice, and I guess because I think it's just a beautiful song, and I wanted to break up kind of all like the evil and horrible violence with something that was just more mournful and lamenting, because there's a lot of bad people. There's a lot of devilish, diabolical acts. So I thought it would be nice to have moments of or a moment that was a reprieve from all that
Hmm.
evil and dastardly violence.
That's the thing that I noticed reading the book, the fact that there's obviously the common point would be murder, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
you've got somewhere it's obviously a murder of like a woman murdering a man, and then somewhere it's the other way around, and then you've got somewhere
Yep.
it's a woman murdering another woman. And which version do you think, if that makes sense, is most what represented, do you think? I'm guessing it's going to be men killing women, but is that the
Yep.
case?
It is absolutely the case. So much so that I had to really get very intentional in my selection so it wasn't completely repetitive. There is so some ballad scholars have even coined the phrase the murdered sweetheart ballad. And it is by far the most common trope that you find in this tradition. And the trope is actually rather set in stone as far as like the basic elements go. And that is that there is a woman who is impregnated by a man who she is not married to. He promises her marriage and a life together. He says, "Come ride on my horse or come with me and I will take you away." But instead, he takes her somewhere remote and he murders her in some fashion. There's generally a moment of pleading where she pleads for her life and that of her unborn child. He kills her anyways, and then he usually throws her in the river. And oftentimes there's remorse at the end or not. Um, but it is so common that there are just multitudinous variations on this theme that run through um, the traditions of several key murder ballads, if that makes sense, because each ballad, like folklore, like a folk tale, will have sort of this like amorphous world of variation. And it's funny that even within all these variations, those main sort of parts of the trope remain
Yeah.
with these murdered sweetheart ballads. Yeah, but that's not there. There are plenty of other ballads where a woman kills a man out of jealousy or self-defense, or like I said, a woman kills her sister. A woman kills her children. There is a song called "The Cruel Mother" that is about infanticide. But yeah, generally, dudes killing the ladies because they're pregnant and they don't want to like deal with it.
Yeah. Are they always based on like an actual historical thing? Like, is this a crossover of like music and true crime, or sometimes are they just literally folklore?
Both, both. It's really interesting. In the American part of the tradition, some of our most famous ones are based on actual murders. For example, the song Delia's Gone is based on the true life murder of a young Black girl in Savannah, Georgia, in the late 19th century. Pearl Bryan is another one, Omi Wise, and these were all based on real accounts of murder. Some of the older ones that do date can be traced mostly back to the UK, England specifically, some to Scotland, and then some to Ireland as well. But a lot come from England. Those have more of like a root in sort of folklore, and they are more just like legends or tales that just kind of get recycled.
Hmm. Yeah. So how do you see murder ballads as a category, I suppose, fitting into wider folklore, or do you think that they're actually just a separate part of folk music? Is they can we draw that distinction?
I think that they're like cousins. I think that they're kind of cousins. There are definitely, and because when you sent me this question, I thought a lot about it because I find it very interesting. Um, they function like folklore, like I said, in that there are variations that um, change over geography and time, just as folklore does. Um, there are, especially when we're talking about the older murder ballads that go back to England, there's a lot of similar themes of, you know, magical objects. There's an old ballad called Unquiet Grave, in which there is the main character has three things to go retrieve. You know, is tasked with three tasks, which is very much a thing that comes up over again in fairy tales and folklore. So when you get into the older stuff, there is definitely motifs that feel the same. But I have yet to find like a one-to-one example of like a murder ballad and a folk tale. Now, it could absolutely exist because there are, in my research, I did kind of brush up against some ballads that weren't quite murder ballads, but they were sort of discussed in the same breath as murder ballads that were related to sort of like night, like Arthurian legend and sort of old legends of knights and stuff. But I didn't have the time to delve too deeply into that. So I think if I were to go back to the research and dig a little deeper, I could find more direct connections. But I think for me, the way it sort of acts like folklore is really in that sense of someone hears the tale, retells the tale, and it changes. But in this sense, in this case, you know, they hear the song, they replay the song, and it functions the same and it evolves the same because they're both, you know, evolved through oral tradition.
Hmm. I know you mentioned there that a lot of the ballads sort of come from the UK and then kind of migrate to
Mm-hmm.
the US. So how do they actually
Yeah.
change when they cross the pond? And do they ever go the other way?
I did not find many that went the other way. Because so many, a lot of them came over with like the Scots Irish folk who came over and settled in Appalachia. Murder ballads have like a deep, deep, deep root, as far as America goes, deeply rooted in Appalachia, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, deep in those hollers where oral tradition thrives. And that area was settled by the Scots Irish specifically. And so I haven't seen any instances of it going back. There hasn't been like a flow back the other way. And something that is interesting that I found in my research about how they changed when they came to the United States is a lot of times there were some pretty adult themes. There are themes of incest, rape, just sex in general. And those got kind of dropped off when they came to the United States, which makes sense to me as we are, based in sort of a puritanical, chaste sort of, ethos here. And I found that just to be an interesting distinction. The other way they changed is that they just like location names would be changed. So there's a song called Knoxville Girl that can be traced back to a song called Oxford Girl or the Oxford Lass coming from England. And then there's a version called Waco Girl, and Waco was a town in Texas. So, people would take it and kind of make it fit their region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool.
But that said, now that I'm thinking about it, and when I think about murder ballads were really popular with sort of the English and American folk music revivals of like the 60s and 70s. So songs like some of our American ones, such as Delia, Bummy Wise, all of those, they were played by some of the folk musicians in England and Ireland, and that was more just sort of an exchange of music between musicians, I believe, less a result of like immigration or anything like that. More just like just sort of a universal sharing of this music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was something I noticed as well, that you mentioned often how many different artists in the 20th century have actually done their own version of murder ballads.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Like, why are people still drawn to them? Is it because people are just really a bit icky?
It's so interesting because the contemporary ones, depending on who's doing it, there's different. I believe there's different intentions, right? And some are icky. Yes, some are very icky. It's funny because I've even spoken to folk musicians who they know these songs, they played these songs, but they've never stopped to think, wait, why am I singing this really chipper song about a woman being murdered? It's kind of like, it's just so part of folk music and just so sort of like in it that people just, they like the songs, they play the songs, and there isn't a ton of thought necessarily about what does this imply or the implications of singing this in such a chipper way. But there's also this very cool trend that started happening in the last century of women taking the genre, subgenre, and sort of reclaiming it, where it was not so much stories of like cold-blooded murder, it was stories of self-defense. Some were revenge. Great examples would be the Chicks' Goodbye Earl, where the murder is about a no good man. So somewhat there's more of a sense of justification. Gillian Welch has this gorgeous song called Caleb Meyer, in which the woman kills a man who's attempting to rape her. And then Taylor Swift has a great song called No Body, No Crime, which is about basically revenge for her friend's murder. So oftentimes when women are approaching this, it's less about cold, calculated violence and more about like revenge, justice, like seeking justice that was otherwise not served, or self-defense. And that is really true of many of the female like female written or sort of interpreted murder ballads that I'm aware of. Yeah.
So I was wondering about that because of the fact that some of them almost idealize the victim despite what's
Yeah.
happened to them. And they're fairly misogynistic, let's be honest. So I was wondering,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way for people to reclaim them? And obviously you've explained a little bit there that there is. And I think I'm hoping that some of these more recent ones are based on fictional events. So is that another way
Yeah.
of women kind of engaging with them?
Yes, and that is, I think that's possibly one of the most interesting. But as a feminist, and when I started realizing that this subject matter was just ripe with misogynistic concepts and patriarchal ideas to be unpacked, I became very interested in this idea of, as we see in many like crime procedurals and TV shows and media, what the writer Alice Boleyn coined as the dead girl show. So to use Twin Peaks as an example of this in the media, it begins with the beautiful image of the dead Laura Palmer, right? White face, blue lips, still beautiful. This idea of a woman stripped of her agency, perfect quiet, perfect stillness, as being like the most beautiful version of a woman, which, let's face it, that's just disgusting and messed up. But it is just everywhere in murder ballads. Perfect example, like in the Twa Sisters or Dreadful Wind in the Rain, it says her body floated like up down the river like a gold on the water like a golden swan. Oftentimes it talked about their perfect like lily white hands. So it's also very like white centric and Eurocentric, because in a song about a Black victim, say Delia Green, a real girl, she was murdered when she was 14 years old. The songs about her are not just misogynistic; it's filled with misogynoir. So she, in her ballad tradition, was not even sung as a child. She was turned into a full grown woman who was like words like trifling and a gambler, got around town. And Johnny Cash's version, sorry to all the Johnny Cash fans, is despicably mean about her, calling her low down. I believe he calls her trifling, basically saying she deserved it. So to me, the while the white victims are these beautiful, angelic, like that's messed up on its own, right? That they're so beautiful as dead bodies, but that a Black girl is not even afforded any of that. She's just degraded fully. Now, one of my favorite reclamations is actually Harry Belafonte's version of Delia's Gone, which is a stunning song. And like when I think about all of the other songs about Delia, I cry when I listen to it. And I recommend anyone to go out and listen to it because he doesn't say anything bad about her. It's a simple, sort of slow, melancholy lament just about a woman named Delia, and about sort of it's just more of a lament. So I find that to be a very important reclamation. Then I don't know where the intention was with that, but it's a relief that at least there's that one, at least there's that one song for Delia.
Mm. Yeah, I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was really interesting when you sort of mentioned in the book about how there's obviously the different way that the female victims are portrayed, but then you've got that one with Stagger Lee, and it's how
Yeah.
the perpetrator is then almost reclaimed as a weird kind of anti-hero, which was really interesting.
Yes. Yes. That was the longest chapter. That was the chapter that had to um, get edited down so much, and I think it still is the longest chapter in the book because Stagger Lee, that is a solidly American murder ballad, and it's a story about this man. It's a true story. There's a guy named Lee Shelton, and in a bar in St. Louis, and again the late 19th century. That's when a lot of these murders took place that then turned into ballads. Got into a fight with a guy named Billy Lyons in a bar. and shot him. And there's people think it was over like a Stetson hat. Like supposedly Shelton had this super nice white fancy Stetson hat, which at the time was like a major status symbol. And that's sort of the rumor. And then there's various accounts of how it happened. In fact, there's a man named Cecil Brown who wrote a great book called um, I'm gonna get the title wrong, but it's Staggo Lee Shot Billy. I'm pretty sure is the title. It is in the book, in the recommended reading section. And he has a great. I feel like his account of it is maybe probably the most sort of researched and sort of like fleshed out account of it. But regardless of what actually happened in that bar, the figure of Staggerly, which is so funny because it went from Lee Shelton, who had the nickname Stack, so it went from like Stack to Stack-O-Lee to Staggo-Lee to Staggerly, which is probably the most contemporary version of it because that Nick Cave's version is called Staggerly. He became what's this idea of this bad man figure, which became this is according to Cecil Brown's book as well. I really leaned on his scholarship and some other great scholarship from some Black historians or Black scholars of the music. He became sort of this proxy for Black masculinity. In fact, so much that the Black Panthers back in the 60s used to really revere him sort of as a figure of strength against the white man. And in the book, I do talk a little bit about this idea that Billy became sort of a proxy for white supremacy and the white man and white power because he supposedly worked as sort of like a middleman between like a white boss and Black laborers in St. Louis, I believe, on ships or on docks or something like that. And he kind of was this figure who kind of did the white man's bidding and sort of doled punishment and harshness to the laborers. So in defeating Billy, Stagg sort of defeats the white man. It's endlessly interesting. And I'm going to look this up because I want to get the name of this book correct because I guess say you could read my book or read the chapter, but if you really want to know about Staggerly, I would say Staggo-Lee Shot Billy. So Staggo-Lee, Stagolee, which is an older version of the name. Shot Billy by Cecil Brown. It's a great book.
Cool. This is probably a horrible question, but do you have a favorite murder ballad, if there can be such a thing?
Yeah, yeah. I probably the Twa Sisters because it was the first one. I'm still obsessed with that bone hair fiddle. It still is just delicious imagery to me. Yeah, as far as like actual songs go, like as far as like melodies go, I find the melody for Omi Wise to be particularly beautiful. It's just there's like a sadness to it. Because it's funny in studying these, I had to focus mostly on just the lyric tradition because I was working with a lot of books that maybe had some tiny sheet music, but a lot of the early collectors of ballads, they were collecting mostly lyrics as if it was just folklore, you know. And at times they would collect the tunes as well, but I couldn't focus as much on the tunes because that was like a whole nother almost scientific area of the scholarship and there just wasn't time or space. But when I then went back and started listening to more of the songs, Omi Wise stuck out to me as just a particularly sort of beautiful tune.
Mm. I was wondering about that actually, because obviously you've got the lyrics and you've chosen the individual versions
Mm-hmm.
because there'll be that many to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was wondering, how do we know what these sounded like? And obviously if people have made their own recorded version, there must be
Yes.
music somewhere. So I was like, how do you even begin putting those two things together?
So a lot of them, we didn't know what they sounded like until, say, the 20s, when they started actually recording things. The earlier collectors, like Cecil Sharp being one. He was a British English folklorist and song collector, and his books were a huge source for me. He collected lyrics, but also like snippets of tunes. Like basically, he would go around, say Appalachia, say West Virginia, hear that someone's got a song. He'd go meet them on their front porch. They'd play a little bit of the tune. He'd write down the lyrics, but and then maybe do a little bit of notation, a little bit of notation on the tune itself. But that's, I mean, I feel like that's much more of like a, I don't, musicologist's sort of realm to understand that. And I think that a lot of the songs, by the time recording came along and people were able to record, people just knew the songs because they'd heard them. They'd heard someone play them, especially if they're from the region. They heard their mom singing it in the kitchen, or they went to gatherings where people were playing it again on porches. And so I think a lot of it came down similar to oral tradition. People just knew the songs. And then once they were recorded, then, it was able to, more people could hear it and play it. But as a person who is not a musician, that whole part of it, again, was something that I chose not to get lost in, because I would absolutely be lost in it. So I focus mostly on lyrics and history.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned a couple of people who collected these ballads
Mm-hmm.
and so on, and it always endlessly fascinates me because I went to see the folk singer John Tams a little while ago, who UK
Mm-hmm.
listeners will recognise from the TV series Sharp because he played Hagman in that. And he was saying that he'd come across one collector who just collected nothing but lyrics and didn't think the music was
Yeah.
important. And then one collector
Yes.
who literally only collected the music and didn't think the lyrics were important, but no one knows which ones go together. And I was like, well, where do you even find
Yes.
them written down though? Like, who actually has preserved these?
Well, at the there is a place in London, actually, and it's so funny because I was just in London on a family trip and I didn't get to go. But the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library
Hmm.
has the Cecil Sharp collection, and it has sort of both. It has little bits of sort of like sheet music as well as lyrics. So also the Smithsonian here, like the Folkways collection, the John and Alan Lomax archives are similar as well, where there are just like notes, because these people were just out in the field, right? And this was at a time before computers and Google Docs and stuff, so it was just writing stuff down on paper. Now Lomax was actually able to take early recording equipment out into the field to actually get some of the actual audio. But in places like that, so the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library has the Cecil Sharp collection, and then the Smithsonian Folkways has the Lomax collection. And I'm sure there's other places. I believe maybe Oxford. I think Oxford University might have some as well. They have oh yes, I believe they have and I would have to go back and look at my research, but I believe they might have like a sort of like a repository of old ballad collections as well, including a lot of the broadside. I believe they actually have the broadsides that a lot of these came from back in like the 17th, 16th century even.
Yeah, because they're a weird concept, aren't they? That people would sort of buy this sheet of lyrics and then
Yeah,
like, they would learn the tune from someone in the street and then everyone,
yeah.
and like, imagine doing that now.
I know. Yeah, no, it's yeah, like someone would like get the broadside, and sometimes they would just make up their own tune and then just go wander about the countryside playing it as sort of a very actually as a form of true crime if it was a true story.
Mm.
Like news was a way of like passing along the news of what happened if someone was executed, say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know you come across that with some of the public executions, and it's weird that I know this, but
Hmm.
that they would sometimes have like a ballad about what the killer had done, and you're like,
Yep.
that's probably going to have been embellished a little bit, let's be honest.
Yeah. Yes, that was popular. That was pretty popular.
People do strange things for entertainment, don't they?
Yes, I mean, like I'm absolutely a person who I'm like, there's a new documentary about like a serial killer. I'm in. Let's go. Like I'm watching it. But I'm also a huge horror fan and everything, so I tend to gravitate towards macabre and dark things.
Mm,
But it is funny that like they say that the largest audience for true crime is women, which is interesting to me.
yeah, yeah, you can sort of see why. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, we've talked about the collection being illustrated, and
Yes.
obviously it's brilliant having all these beautiful illustrations. So I was curious, how did you decide what needed to go in each illustration for each ballad? Like, did you have a process, or was it more just what came to mind while you were listening to them?
Well, the one sort of set of parameters I had for myself was that when it was a song about a real person, I framed it sort of as a memorial image. So for songs of the like Delia, Omi Wise, Pearl Bryan, as Staggerly as well, I would do sort of a portrait, and I didn't know what they looked like because there aren't many images of these people since they it was back before widespread photography. So I would kind of make up a person. I would try to imagine who, like for example, Omi Wise. There she is.
Mm.
Hello. I would sort of just like imagine a character for it, and then I would surround them with something floral, some kind of floral thing with their name. And I wanted that as sort of just to be respectful. I didn't necessarily, if it's a real person, I didn't really want it to be like a bloody like image with knives and murder, which some of the other images are. Um, I wanted it to be respectful, and it was also a way of sort of just like breaking things up and having sort of like a visual thread went through. Now for the fictitious ones, I just kind of approached them intuitively, like I do really any illustration. Oftentimes I would have no idea what it would be. I would kind of try to figure out what the emotional core for me was and how I wanted to express that. I used a lot of sort of anthropomorphized elements of nature. So oftentimes there are clouds with faces in it that are crying, or waves with faces that are crying, because I like the idea that the environment around these victims were weeping for them, because I didn't want it just to be horrifying. I wanted it to be sad too, and have a sense of sort of empathy for the victims. So that was a thread that went throughout. But yeah, a lot of them I just kind of start winging it, and I worked digitally on these, which meant that I could just kind of get in there, start sketching, and then just start changing, and then let it build and build and become. Some of them were pretty challenging to figure out, and I came up with some weird solutions. For example, there were two songs that I chose to put right next to each other: Rose Connolly and Knoxville Girl. And I chose to put those next to each other because they are two incredibly similar classic murdered sweetheart ballads. They are not, I mean, I feel like there are some speculation that they could be rooted somewhere in something real, especially for Knoxville Girl, but that's very sort of unknown and kind of speculative. And I wanted them to be near each other because I did want to have one moment of showing how repetitive these murder sweetheart ballads could be. And I didn't just want to like have like a scene with a river or like a woman in it. So I did these weird, I don't know how well this is going to show up on YouTube, but I did these weird like figures
Hmm.
that contained the story, and I made them like sister pieces to each other. So one's facing one way, one's facing the other way.
Hmm.
And I just thought of it kind of like as this anthropomorphized landscape that contained everything within it. And I was pretty happy with that solution. It's kind of weird, but it felt interesting to me. It felt like a little less on the nose.
Mm.
Um, it's just sometimes something I try to do. I try to think of maybe the less obvious way to create imagery.
Yeah. I think they're a
Yeah.
good sort of fitting tribute, particularly for the ones where they are based on real people. Then obviously
Mm-hmm.
for some of them, this is possibly the only imagery that we'll have for them. So it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of quite nice to have the memorial images, like you said, but I do like
Mm-hmm.
the slightly more fantastical ones because the Twa
Yeah.
Sisters one that you've got is really good as well.
Yeah. 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 And the other thing with it was there were time constraints. So I was only really able to make like three or four that were like kind of like full page, the whole page is filled up with images, with imagery, as opposed to a lot of them are more simple on a black background. And that was simply just a time issue. I had 3 months to do the illustrations. So I kind of had to be strategic. And had I had more time, I probably would have gone more all out for all of them. But I'm still happy. It's nice to have some that are complex and with a lot going on, and then some that are simpler. It creates more of like a visual rhythm like throughout.
Hmm.
And that's how I set up the book too. I set up the book visually. I chose the order based on the illustrations because
Oh,
at the end of
cool.
the day, I am an illustrator, and there's like a rhythm with the images that I needed there to be.
Yeah, makes
Um,
sense.
mhm.
Cool. So obviously bearing in mind that you've obviously worked on all of these other projects as well, and now you've
Mm-hmm.
done this one. What are you working on right now, and where can people find you online?
Online, I do have a website that is horrifically not updated. That is www.katyart.com. I got that domain in 2003. I'm gonna hang on to it forever. Okay. Uh, but honestly, Instagram is the best. I am at Goody Horan, so GOODYHORAN. That's the best place to keep up with me. As far as what I'm working on now, that is a great question. I have some ideas for other books, but I just don't. I This was a lot. This took a lot out of me, and I've kind of been focusing on self care and just kind of recovering from just like a really intense like couple years. So while I have ideas for some other books, I'm kind of I'm spending more time just in the studio, painting, working on sculptures. Because before I do illustration work, and I made this book, but I've also before all that I really was a fine artist prior to illustrating a book called Literary Witches in 2015. But for the first 10 years of my career, I was mostly just showing work in galleries. So I love studio practice. I love painting. I love making things. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Although I have this this like graphic horror novel that I've been working on since 2020 that I'm hoping to kind of get back to because I love it. It's a collection of short stories like comics. Um, but God, it's very daunting. Everything feels very daunting right now because everything is like it's just I'm like, oh no, these are all just new mountains to climb, and I am tired. I am
Mm.
tired. So I'm working on being kind to myself and allowing myself to move slowly and all of that. I'm working
Yeah,
on building healthier work habits is what I'm
yeah. I
working
suppose
on.
if you've spent all that time looking at like murder, then obviously you're going to want to do
Yeah.
something a bit lighter.
Actually, no, that's you would think, but not for me. Not for I'm a demented lunatic. So everything I do is still dark. It will continue to be dark. But it's more just about sort of like the pressure that I put on myself and this intense amount of work. Like I have a 10-year-old daughter, and working on this book around the clock while still being a mom was just a lot. And yeah, it was just a very just intense, just labor wise, just and also writing a book was crazy. Like, I'd never really written anything before. So that was like just like a really new, intense, terrifying. process. So I
Mm-hmm.
think my brain just needs like a little time to like regenerate itself. It's taking a while too. It's taking longer than I would have hoped, but
It's
I'll
a
get
bit like
there.
that thing when you restart your computer and you think it's going to come straight back on and it just sits there
Oh
forever.
no. Yeah, just spinning. That's a great analogy for where I'm at.
Well, hopefully you'll get that sorted out soon.
I will. Hopefully. Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely chatting to you, and I think it's been really fun
Yes.
being able, and I like the fact that it's been murdery stuff that I've been able to get music onto the podcast at last. Because I think if it had been like
Finally.
sort of twee romantic ballads, I would have been a bit like, ugh, yeah.
Yeah, that's not as fun. I mean, for some people, for people who are not mentally ill like me, good for you guys. But there's a lot of us out there that really were very fascinated by the dark and macabre, and that's just the way we are. And I love all of us dark weirdos.
Well, the Gothic always has a place here on the podcast. I mean,
Yes,
look at
yes.
myself, clearly.
Obviously, that killer eyeliner is amazing and working. Yes.
So yeah, it's always nice to meet a fellow sort of fan of the dark side, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting talking to you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.
Excellent. See you soon. Well, hello there. I just wanted to do a quick review of this excellent book, Murder Ballads, Illustrated Lyrics and Lore by Katy Horan. And it is so much fun, and I know that sounds really weird for a book called Murder Ballads. And I sort of realised that I'd never really focused on folk music on the podcast before. And Murder Ballads are a really interesting little sub-niche of folk music. And Nick Cave did one with Kylie Minogue. That's like the famous one everyone knows. And the thing about Murder Ballads is that they do come in different flavours. They can be about men killing their sweethearts. It can be about women killing family members or their sweethearts for revenge. It can be about, in one case, a female lover killing a female lover, which is quite an interesting story. But what Katy has done with each of these is she's collected a range of the ballads. She gives you the background context for where the ballad came from, if indeed that is known. In some cases, it's more a question of it's the historical context where the ballad came from. In other cases, it's the actual true story that underpins this particular story, which you get more with the American ones where they're based on true crime, whereas the British ones, it's not always quite so obvious. And then she gives you the lyrics for a version, because obviously there are various versions available. And she's focused very much on the lyrics rather than the tunes, although you can obviously find versions of them by different artists on YouTube. And she does also list different people who've done versions in the books. You can always go and look for specific ones. As well as it also collecting together the different ballads and basically where they come from and things like that. It's also illustrated as well. So for example, there's the illustration for the one that's the odd one out, shall we say, because that is very much a story about Queen Jane, i.e. Jane Seymour, and what happened to her. So it's not a murder, but it's about the death of a woman. So she's included that. So she's included various different illustrations. And there's another one, which obviously helped to give a little bit more context and to give a flavour to each of the ballads as well. So I really, really enjoyed it. It's a really easy read because each chapter is quite short, because it's basically the story of the ballad and then the lyrics. You can read it really quickly, but it also makes it quite a good book to dip in and out of as well. So I highly recommend it. It's a very, very interesting book. It's well written, it's well illustrated as well. It really perfectly captures the tone of Murder Ballads as a concept. So if you're looking to dip your toe into folk music, this would be a really good place to start, especially if you already like true crime, which I'm sure some of you already know that I do. So highly recommended, and I think you should go and check it out. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, So if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles, and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.